Hey, hey, hey! Ready for another absolutely bonkers tale from our little corner of the internet? Isn't it crazy that, these days, nobody can seem to keep anything to themselves? Secrets used to stay hidden. Now people practically live-tweet their whole lives, including the stuff they really ought to keep private. Today on our platform, cheating doesn't happen only behind closed doors. It's got its own hashtag. I discovered my wife was cheating through a hidden Twitter account. I used that account to wreck her career. I'm 31 male, and I've been married to Tanya, 29 female, for 3 years. We dated 3 years before that. You'd assume that after knowing someone that long there wouldn't be many surprises left. Unfortunately for me, that wasn't the case, and it's destroyed a lot for me. When I first met Tanya, she was a huge reader. Books were her favorite hobby by far. She wasn't obsessed with social media or other people's opinions, and I loved that about her. Although she read a lot, it wasn't the trashy stuff. She liked fantasy, sci-fi, and more serious literature. I know some book people lean heavily into explicit stuff and still call themselves readers. I'm probably stepping on toes saying that, but that's how I saw it. A little later, she started using TikTok, mostly to find book recommendations and post short reviews. I use TikTok too, so her joining didn't raise red flags for me. Even though I appreciated that she wasn't into the usual nonsense on social platforms, I wouldn't have minded if she decided to be on every app. If she did, though, I expected her to tell me. We didn't keep much from each other. So if she suddenly opened a Reddit account or something similar, I figured she'd mention it, because it would be a notable change for her. The only reason she wouldn't tell me would be if she was up to something she shouldn't. That's the background you need. The trouble began when she casually referred to something she'd seen online. I can't remember exactly what it was, but she started, "I saw this thing on Twitter," then corrected herself, "TikTok." That felt unnatural because she barely used Twitter. There was no obvious reason for that slip. I brought it up. She shrugged it off like it was nothing. I mostly believed her, but I like puzzles and logic, so I probably overanalyzed it. Still, something didn't sit right. I forgot about it by the end of the day, and if fate had been kind, that would have been the end. Of course it wasn't. Roughly a month later, I walked into the living room and found her on her laptop. I came up behind her and spoke. She jumped. Sure, being startled was normal, but the way she slammed the laptop shut and tried to act casual wasn't just surprise. She was hiding something. My mind jumped back to that Twitter slip, and I suspected she had a burner account. For someone who wasn't into social media, a secret Twitter made no sense unless it was some private diary she didn't want me to see. I didn't call her out right then, but I decided I'd check her browser history when I had the chance. It felt invasive, and if it truly was just a private diary, I would back off. But if she was posting to the public, even anonymously, I didn't think it would be unreasonable to look. Later that week, I got her laptop when she wasn't around. I opened the browser and scanned the history. I didn't need to dig deep. Twitter was one of the last sites she'd visited before sleep. When I opened it, it was already logged in. I noted her handle and went straight to her DMs. There were a few conversations, pretty basic. I put the laptop away since I had the handle. It was safer to do the rest of my snooping on my phone. The things I read left me feeling totally betrayed. The account read diary-like, but not wholesome. She wrote about things she clearly couldn't say to her friends, or to me because of judgment. There weren't many tweets, so I scrolled to the beginning. She started by writing about a guy she liked at the local bookstore. A staffer who seemed to read the books she picked out. She said she'd started catching feelings and planned to ask him out for boba, adding, "I know I shouldn't," without explaining why. At that moment, I tried to rationalize it, hoping it was just fantasy or a performance. But then she tweeted she'd actually gone on the boba date, and it had been amazing. One line really tore me up. If I hadn't already found mine, I would have sworn he was my soulmate. You might think a line like that could be comforting, but the fact that she could imagine someone else as a soulmate was devastating. Some people get cheated on over a quick fling. I was being cheated on at a deep emotional level, and it didn't stop there. It clearly became physical. She didn't spell it out, but she tweeted she was going to see him, and hours later posted that meme of a doll with its hair all messed up. The kind of post used to hint that someone just had sex. I've always disliked that image. It feels so crude to announce that publicly. but anonymity made her comfortable. I couldn't confirm whether they had sex that day, but what she posted pointed away from it being about me. Her anonymous account wasn't only about the affair. She used it to vent about family, gripe about small things I did that annoyed her, and complain about work. None of that mattered next to watching your wife essentially live-tweet her affair. One of her more recent tweets mentioned that she and the other guy were planning a trip to Bow Festival, but she wasn't sure she could go without causing a fuss. She casually framed their story like something out of a romance novel, and said she hated that they couldn't see it through. Someone replied that it was a tragic romance, and she agreed, laughing. I hated how easily she could flip from discussing the affair to posting about a new bagel spot. I didn't know what to do. Was I supposed to confront her or confront the other guy? Was I meant to monitor her tweets to catch them in the act? I really didn't know what to do, but I didn't want to sit on it because I was too furious to spend any more time pretending everything was normal. I ultimately decided to confront the other man, but this story has been long enough, so I'll finish the rest in an update tomorrow morning. I'd welcome any thoughts or advice, since I haven't divorced Tanya yet. That little slip, saying Twitter instead of TikTok, felt like a classic. I got caught tell. What made it worse was how nonchalant she seemed about the whole thing, like she was starring in some romance novel, and casually tweeting about her affair in between posts about bagels. Ugh, that contrast made everything feel even stranger. Music. Update 1. Sorry for the interruption, but I'm back to finish the story I started yesterday. I hadn't really weighed all my options because I was too angry to calm down and I wanted to act fast. So I decided to go to the bookstore and confront her partner. I knew which bookstore she frequented, so I went straight there. I didn't know much about the guy, but the store wasn't huge and there were only a few male employees. She'd mentioned him making small talk while checking out, so I guess he might be at the register. To figure out who he was, I grabbed a book I knew she liked and took it to the till. The guy behind the counter looked like he was in his early 20s, and when I put the book down he commented that it was a great pick. His manner made him seem like the one I was after. But since I couldn't be sure, I had to be cautious. I needed confirmation. So I went all in. Before I paid, I told him a woman named Tanya had recommended the shop to me. He nodded and said, "She's one of our best customers. She's fantastic." That confirmed he knew who I meant. At that point I decided to push it further. I told him that Tanya had mentioned they had a little thing going on. I tried to keep my tone light, so he wouldn't feel threatened, and would let his guard down. It worked. He smiled awkwardly and nodded. It was obvious he had no idea she had a husband, which is why he hadn't been cautious. That's when I struck. I asked if he knew she was married and watched his expression change instantly. Music. He denied it and insisted she wasn't married. I showed him my wedding ring and corrected him. She had been married for 3 years. He was young and didn't seem like someone to scare, but I told him it would be better for him to stay away from her. I wasn't that invested in keeping the marriage. Divorce was already on my mind, but I didn't want him complicating his life with someone who'd been that unfaithful. He didn't argue much. He apologized and said she'd never hinted at being involved with anyone, and he wouldn't have gotten involved if he'd known. I told him I believed him, and left without buying the book. Right after that I went to see a divorce attorney a friend had recommended, someone my friend had used in his own divorce, and who came out well. I felt confident I'd get the same result, especially since it seemed clear I hadn't been at fault. As soon as Tanya and I were face to face again, I confronted her. I told her I knew about her affair with the bookstore guy. She was so stunned she dropped what she was holding and just froze. I told her she could try to hide things from me, but if she lied I would always find a way to know. She looked terrified, frozen, wide-eyed, probably unsure what I'd do now that I knew. I told her there was no way I'd stay with her after this, and I know she understood. I told her I'd already spoken to a divorce lawyer, but what enraged me most was that she'd wasted 6 years of my life to sleep with a kid from a bookstore. I gave her 1 hour to pack as much as she could, and I wasn't going to extend it. She didn't have to say anything, but she did. She tried to apologize and begged to explain, but I told her there was nothing she could say. She slept with him while married. That was all there was to it. I pointed to the room and told her to start packing. As I write this, she's out of the house. Thankfully she left within that hour. That was 2 days ago. Now I'm focusing on finalizing the divorce, but I still want a way to get back at her in case things don't go my way. She needs to learn an important lesson from this divorce. Update 2. I'm back after being away for a while. I don't know how many of you remember the story about Tanya and the secret Twitter account that exposed her cheating. I confronted her and had her leave, and the best part was she never knew how I found out. About a week after I sent her packing, she messaged me asking how I knew she was cheating. I told her she didn't deserve to know. She asked if I'd paid someone to follow her, but I just repeated that she didn't deserve the answer. I think she was trying to blame me or paint me as a paranoid stalker. She didn't contact me again until we met about the divorce. For context, since we married, she'd worked at an upscale marketing firm and had moved up a few times. Our incomes were about even, so she couldn't expect alimony. We had no kids, no joint accounts, and I had only slightly more savings. There was no point trying to split everything down the middle. The main sticking point was the apartment. We were still living there, but it was rented and most of her things were still inside. I agreed to cover moving costs for her remaining items, including some shared furniture, and to pay 2 months' rent for a new place so she could get settled. After that, she'd handle rent herself. We ended up with a reasonable agreement, and I didn't even need to bring up her cheating, which probably worked out in her favor. But I wasn't finished with her. At no point did she seem to suspect I'd discovered the affair via her Twitter. The account remained up, but she'd stopped posting. The motivation was gone. She did post one angry tweet when I served her with divorce papers, but that wasn't my focus. Instead, I collected every tweet she'd made about her job and her boss. She never named the company, but she was vicious about how annoyed she was and even hinted at a client. I'm sure you can guess where I'm headed. I bundled those tweets and sent them to her boss. Finding his email and sending the messages anonymously wasn't difficult. I told him who the account belonged to and acknowledged there wasn't irrefutable proof, but there was enough for him to investigate. It took a while, but about 2 weeks later he replied asking if I'd confirm who I was, though he said he'd look into it either way. I said I could provide context but wouldn't reveal my identity, and warned him that if he connected the dots, others might too. A few weeks after that, I got a single email saying he'd taken action and thanking me. I didn't hear from Tanya, so I called her a few days later to ask how things were going. She sounded down and eventually admitted she'd been fired and didn't understand why. They told her they no longer needed her services. Hearing that made me smile. I offered a brief, bland apology and hung up quickly. About a week later, I sent her an anonymous email from the same account telling her I'd found her Twitter. She replied 3 times begging me to reveal who I was, but I never answered again. She deactivated the account soon after. She never told me about any of it, which felt satisfying because it meant she didn't connect the dots to me. She also wouldn't admit to having a secret Twitter account to save face. Everything between us is finally over, and that makes me very happy. I got a little revenge. It wasn't dramatic or elaborate compared to some stories, but it was enough for me, and I'm satisfied. Getting her out of the house so quickly showed exactly where I stood. No dragging things out, no pretending. Clean breaks hurt at first but spare you more pain later. Going straight to a divorce lawyer was smart, no time wasted. And sending those tweets to her boss, that was quiet, effective revenge. No public spectacle, but I made sure the people she worked with knew what kind of things she'd said behind the scenes. Sometimes letting the system handle it is the best move.